actually, okay, so it's going to be a rental. But, oh, and Paul, oh my gosh, yes, Paul. Paul is also a part of Chicagoland Writing Association. Once a month, we all get together. We have a fall event. So you remember last time, Columbia hosted was in stage 2. Learning, tutoring, and performing is a little different. But what we
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm also a graduate student at Columbia, and I'm also a writing student. Hi, I'm Debbie Potter, and over here. I'm also a graduate student at Columbia and a writing center student.
Hi, I'm Cruz. I'm also a graduate student at Columbia and a writing student.
okay, start to go back here.
I'm Josh. I'm a graduate student and writing tutor.
Jordan, a graduate student and a writing tutor.
Muriel, non-graduate student and undergrad at the writing center.
You're feeling really intimidated, right?
No, not really.
I'm Daniel Living. I'm an undergraduate and I'm a tutor at the writing center.
Vanessa Morton, undergraduate tutor.
Nora Lee, undergraduate tutor in the writing center.
I'm Violet Doyle. I'm an undergraduate and I'm a tutor at the writing center.
I'm Catherine Woods, and I'm also an undergraduate writing student.
I'm Jacob Tormina, and I'm an undergraduate writing teacher.
Is that everybody? Okay. For the purposes of the guests and whatnot being able to see you after we have something to eat, and you are?
I'm sorry, I was just walking in.
Oh, no, we're looking at the food over there.
Yeah.
That being videotaped, huh? So we're going to eat first, and then as we're looking, if we were looking, I sent out your Vita, and then I realized that the last entry was like 1990.
I'm the writing club newsletter.
Oh, whoa!
Not that I'm promoting the writing club newsletter. We have a writing store. We have readers' columns. We have articles for direction. We're always looking for good art.
Pages long, something like that.
And you want to turn a page. 1 entry per page.
No, we don't. It's like size 10 font. It's like she's been in the field for 40 years now.
Also, the kids will say, oh, I said, well, yeah. Which was the best thing I just don't know. Is that in almost every issue there's been a tutor's column. For almost over 37 years, tutors have been publishing every issue. Part of my thoughts of places were just starting out in websites. And they need a place, something to read. They can't go back and live the fountain of literature that now exists in all these houses. From the United Arab Emirates, from Europe. And these people are just learning about the idea of legacy. They need to listen to you. And their tutors will have to listen to you. Because you've got so much more experience than they do. So I'm always aiming for people to publish. And all the reviewers on the website, everyone has to be a good
I'm the director of the Writing Center in the Learning Studio at Columbia College, Chicago.
Who has set up what? What have you done here?
Well, I mean, this is a culmination of all of our work.
And you edited a newsletter, I believe?
I did edit the International Writing Center Association newsletter until it was pulled out from underneath the information rolled into the website itself. So I still have all of the old copies, and I still have a box of memories of being the editor of Update.
It was a very important publication. I don't know why they pulled it.
Well, you know, it's what it is. The politics of everything. No, so that's really, I mean, I've been here since 2007, and if not for the 65 plus, I think I'm more than 65 plus tutors that work here, I wouldn't have a job. So.
And she organized all of you, so a round of applause.
Color in the middle.
This is stupid. The dumbest thing ever. There. Problem solved.
Jesus, here.
Bro.
A student at 5 needed to out.
I'm very confused about how this is working. I think someone just left. They had a, well, I mean, they had a class. Bring Demi. Water really quick. I know.
Yes. So, yes, please help yourself. The loose salad does have bacon and some cheese in it. So, if you don't like bacon or cheese, have the house salad.
Is there mushrooms in it?
And her
3 days anyway, so
her loose specialty pizza is not cut up. So, grab a knife. It's never cut up.
Nita, is
Right?
does this pizza, or does this have mushrooms in it? This thing?
It does have mushrooms. This one doesn't. Sorry. Sorry.
I want bacon and blue cheese.
Okay, why don't we get knives? Let's grab a couple knives and put them on the pizzas.
Good idea.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, good. Somebody just want gluten-free? Or no? Okay. I thought somebody wanted gluten-free. Oh, we're good.
I thought,
Okay.
Nita, which one does have the blue cheese? The second one?
That one has the cheese and the bacon. This one has no cheese, no bacon.
Oh, okay.
I just don't want to breathe on top of
thank you.
Okay. And as I'm
I figured you wouldn't like it if I breathed heavy on the motion.
Well, you know, if you were healthy, that'd be fun.
I saw that. But I'm very, Ryan, I was trying to fuss with publisher, and Ryan said, I totally do this. Fortunately, it ended up at you, Columbia College, Chicago tutors, Learning Studio tutors were chosen. First, I'd like to introduce Parker Stockman. Okay. Parker is in the creative fiction department, grad student. He has, what, one more year?
Yeah, about.
One more year. About-ish. One more year-ish, okay? One of the other interviewers, we chose two for today's event. One of the other interviewers is Tatiana Uhach. Tatiana is in the creative nonfiction program as a grad student. And Tatiana will be graduating in May 2014. Or 13. Wait.
No.
I don't think I know this. Okay, no, anyway.
And searching for a job at a writing center.
Okay.
So notes to table 4.
Me too.
Okay. And our speaker guest, our guest speaker for today, our speaker guest speaker for today is Muriel Harris. Please give her a round of applause. More applause, please. Okay.
Nita made us do this.
I did. I said, listen, you can step back there. And what we're going to do is you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well. Tatiana and Parker will go back and forth with some questions for Mickey, and then if you have a question, it would be best if you just came up and stand by Jeff, who just joined us, Jeff is from Wheaton College, and you do what there?
Direct Writing Center.
He directs the Writing Center at Wheaton College. So, yeah, I know. Sorry. So just come and stand by Jeff and by Christine, and we will know that you want to ask a question. Okay. Here you go. But let me make sure that you guys know that when you speak, you need to swing it your way. You need to be fairly close to this, and we need to be fairly close to this.
Can I just do this? Does that work?
Go on.
No, it's okay. Just go ahead and talk.
I'm not going to say anything. Okay. I guess we should explain that I'm sitting up here because I just got over the cold from hell, and I'm just on the upswing, and I don't think I'm contagious, but Nita said stay as far away as you can. And they've had it too, so. Do you want to start? I don't know how, we haven't really planned this.
Yeah, we actually have a
Yeah,
bunch of questions, so.
we prepared a lot of questions, so hopefully we can get through most of them. But we just kind of want to start this out with asking Muriel what she thinks exactly a tutor's job is.
And we decided that instead they're going to make a panel. Have you seen these posters? What my teacher thinks I do, what my parents think I do? Well, they're going to tell us what a tutor really does. You're not really
That's
asking.
how you.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Do I get to ask the next question?
You can answer.
Oh my goodness. Well, actually, some of my favorite articles that you've written are in the role of the tutor and a kind of psychological counselor, but not too much of a counselor capacity. So I like the sympathetic ear, the coach, that kind of thing. How to engage reluctant tutors, your smarts.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what we do is we try and get reluctant writers to engage with us, to talk about their writing, which might be completely terrifying to them or completely boring.
But what you're saying is exactly right. It's so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge emotional packet of affective concerns. There's both the writing, the history of writing, the culture of that person, the linguistic background, the literacy background. There's all kinds of things. And we know that if a teacher says the student's paper is disorganized, the student says, I'm disorganized, right? We take it in as a personal characteristic. So you may be talking about the paper, but the student's hearing it as a directive about them. The most crushing thing I ever heard or saw was that some teacher said, I don't know how you got to college. I mean, where do you start with a paper that, the student's convinced they don't belong there, they're first-year freshmen or whatever, first semester they're in college. So I always consider that cognitively we're talking to the student, affectively we're talking to the student, and we've also got the literacy component, and we're supposed to be managing all that in addition to the differences. Plus, we're not the audience for the paper, so we're supposing who the audience is, and in my role, there was 200-300 graduate students all teaching composition, all under different mentors who taught them different things. So we have to encompass that, plus everybody else in the university who has their own ways of writing, and we don't know enough about how engineers look at writing and how agricultural science people look at writing and physicists people look at writing. So we're taking all that in, and when you say, what does a tutor do? A tutor has to look into this myriad of things and think about strategies to help the other person. I'm convinced we cannot teach writing. We can help people with writing. But the cognitive and emotional part we have to deal with to help them and give them feedback, give them counseling, help them generate ideas, and we could be an audience. Sometimes I think, when they come to you, and I'm sure you've all had these tutorials where they look at you hopelessly, I don't know what to write, or I've got 300 words and I'm supposed to develop this into 5 pages. They haven't had an audience. I don't know about you, but I don't talk to paper and I don't talk to computer screens. But with someone standing in front of me or sitting with me and we're sharing a bowl of popcorn, they're probably going to tell me something, because, oh yeah, really. And I always say, what do computer tutors do? First of all, we play dumb. If they tell you something, I didn't know that, really. And you get all interested in these subjects you couldn't give a damn about. Right? Yeah, but you're all nodding, like, you know, I can see the tutor table going like so. I'm sorry?
Oh, I just said, oh, yes.
Yeah. So we're doing so many things that I can't imagine how we describe what a tutor does. We're doing 1,000 things simultaneously, and if you talk about multitasking, my God, tutors are multitaskers. Yeah. So no, I just am hesitant to encapsulate it, but I think part of what you're saying is so important that there's an affective thing which we haven't explored enough.
Well, see, it's hard to know whether to use the questions in order or the questions
Right.
that follow, because...
Let's go with one that follows.
Okay.
You could tell we've rehearsed this very carefully.
We've worked really hard on this.
We just
but-
kind of gapped for an hour when we met.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
This one.
No.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so actually last semester, Tatiana and I went with a couple of tutors, Anita, to a conference, and we did a panel about the mini hats that tutors wear, especially when they're students. So we actually wanted to get like your opinion. Like, how do you do that? How do you be a peer, but also a student, also someone who's authoritative as a tutor to a student? How do you like kind of balance that peer relationship? You know, kind of like what Stephen North is always saying, like, be their peer, be their peer, be their peer. How do we do that, but also kind of, you know, we know how to structure something, so sometimes it's like, really you should look at this structure, like, let's talk about this, like, you came in here for this, but let's talk about something bigger. Like, how do you do that?
You don't. I guess one of the words that you used worries me, because how can we be authoritative? Because the teacher is the authority. And how can we know what that authority, because we know that readers read differently and people write differently and look at things differently. And I don't know the history of the classroom the student's coming from. I'm not the authority. In my younger days, when I actually looked like below 70, and I know that's hard to picture, I tried to be more of a peer, but I said, how could I be? I mean, here's a graduate student who's writing a dissertation in nuclear waste containment. I haven't a clue. He's the authority in that. I don't know. And some freshman who's writing about soil analysis, I don't know. So he's got some authority. I've got some authority in that I'm sitting there, but I can't be an authority because you know how willing, students in college have played this game for many, many years. Do what they tell you. Put your head down, do what they tell you. And the smarter they are, the more willing they are to say, what does the teacher want here? They want to please the audience. And I love these generic made-up audiences, right for your peers. Oh, but by the way, I'm grading it. So there's an authority there. So I can't be an authority, because the moment I'm an authority, they're going to do what I said. Have you ever tried to say, think of this, or why don't you think of that, or what would you think about that, and then immediately think that that's the right answer? So another thing to play against authority, my job, I think, is to play against authority. I used to say, I'll be the devil's advocate. I'm just going to do this because I totally believe in what you're saying, and I agree with you, which I may not, by the way, or the arguments are very weak. And I give them all the other side of this. Well, devil's advocate, I don't believe that because I knew in school that they told me that evolution wasn't true. I did not go to school in Indiana, where some people believe that. I went to school in Chicago. We actually talked about evolution, and I never heard about creation. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody, but it's not anything I believe in and should be taught in science class. I would work against it by saying, I'm going to be just to help you the devil's advocate, which completely destroys authority. Because they think, oh, that's a really weak argument, but they start trying to best me. So that's the way I work against authority. But as I got older, I couldn't really, because I'm looking older, and I had to use a first name. And as soon as the woman at the desk, who was an adorable Asian woman, who came from a different culture where graduates, she wouldn't even ask the graduate students for donations for money, because if we were collecting for someone's birthday or something, because she respected academics so much. And every once in a while she would say, yes, you have an appointment with Professor Harris. That destroys it. That totally wipes out the peerness. And so I would have to downplay that and work against her. So I work against things as well as work for things. and as a friend. I mean, basically you're all incredibly good people in writing centers. You're willing to work with these people under difficult circumstances, often for less reimbursement or honor or whatever recognition than you so totally deserve. I mean, I know that. So there is a sense in which you're a peer, and you're working with that person in a very comfortable relationship. And if you're a tutor, you know that no paper is final. Everything is going to be different. And another hat that you have to wear, and I'm sort of stacking them up here, is psychologist. Who is that person? How directive should I be? Because some people want things to be told to them, other people want to resist them, which then brings in the cultural hat. I am a second-generation American. I don't know the culture of many other countries. I've traveled there, but you never know just by traveling where some of these people come from culturally. And I make a lot of missteps. I have made so many missteps because I haven't worn the right hat of understanding the different culture. And one thing that leaps to mind right now is I was having a really great relationship, I thought, with a woman from Turkey, and I don't remember what she was working on. But there was something off about what we were doing. And so we were talking, and all of a sudden, finally, something clicked in my mind. And I said, am I bothering you in some way? And she finally looked up and said, I know you want eye contact, but I'm not comfortable with eye contact. And I said, okay, put your eyes down. She didn't have to do what she thought was the American thing, which was not culturally comfortable for her. And then we had a much better time. So there's all these things that you're trying to be. I mean, you're trying to be the interpreter, you're trying to be the coach. You don't want to be the authority. You want to be the devil's advocate. You want to be stupid. Stupid helps. Really, because their urge to explain to you is going to bring ideas that generate other ideas. It's a good heuristic to say, I don't know, tell me more, or say something stupid and they'll respond. And to be the coach, and to be the counselor. And I often use the idea of coach, because the coach sits at the sidelines giving advice, but the coach never goes into the game. So in a sense, we have to stay as coaches. So that's not a hat, that's what, a t-shirt? So there are multiple hats. I mean, how often do you change hats so fast you feel like you're back and forth?
Well,
is this in my way?
No, it's perfect.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The authority just said.
It's the only way we can hear you.
What?
It's the only way we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
okay, so we actually did, in a hurrah to gather other people's questions, we kind of went on Facebook last night and asked the universe. So we have two
Should
questions.
I just tell you that I gave Tatiana? I told her that I only interview in early 16th century Urdu, and I really don't speak anything else. And she told me that she found the website.
Well,
the woman thinks fast.
Hey, Babelfish used to be really big. But yes, so last night we were trying to engage people, and Ryan Spooner, a Chicago-based tutor, award-winning essayist, and recipient of the coveted Rate My Professor Hot Pepper Award, he has the following question. He says, there's an ever-increasing student awareness of the collaborative illusion. He says, they're onto us. How do we deal with the reluctance and the desire to lean on the tutor when we encounter that in students?
As opposed to the collaborative.
Is the idea that people know that they're going to come into the writing center and they don't really say anything. The tutor might offer more and more and more help, the more resistant that they are.
Are you asking how to overcome that?
Yes.
Well, we had the old sit on your hands, I can outstare you technique. And literally, first of all, for a student whose first language is not English, you cannot leap into the conversation. If they're going through she asked me a question, so I have to translate it. Oh, I think I understand her now, so what I want to say is, then I have to translate it into English. So there's a time lapse when there's quietness. But otherwise, if the student is really leaning on you to do the work, is that what you mean? Get up and get some coffee. Okay, a tutor asks questions. Think of a question. If not, if nothing else fails, I'll just look for something about that person to ask about. I mean, if additionally, you know, I make a big deal out of the first couple of minutes of just chatting with each other. How'd your chem class go? Or, you know, what'd you do last week? You know, didn't Purdue play a lousy game this week? Or we find something to chat about for a minute, and then ask one of those questions. And then come back to it and see if they've had time to think about it. People look for help, and that's a totally honest thing. I love help. Don't you want the world to manage all your problems? Hey, wouldn't that be great? It's just a totally human thing. Okay, I have this paper due tomorrow, and I really have something else to do tonight, and I have a meeting that I have to go to, and whatever. Could you please write this for me? I totally get that. I mean, we should all get that. So, give the person time, ask some questions, divert their attention, suggest something that's really stupid, and then they'll come back. That almost always works, by the way. I have no idea what to write about. Well, I don't know, why don't you write about abortion? Oh God, not that. You know, and then they'll come back with something better because they try to top you. So it's, you know, stupid or something. There are multiple games. I mean, we can play a lot of games, but we really should understand that that person really wants help. They really want you to tell them what to do. You know, I'll learn how to write later. I just need to get this paper in. And we're all very product-oriented. We talk, you know, there's process, and now there's post-process, and then people are talking about post-process. So we're supposedly beyond the product stage, but what brings the person in there? Has anyone in this room had a student walk in and say, oh, I'm here because I want to be a better writer? Anyone? Don't they usually have a task? Has anyone ever really just faced somebody who said, no, I'd like to be a better writer? Really? What'd you do? Did she have no tasks in hand, no papers, no assignments? Okay, yeah. That's super. Okay.
In my community classes, it's the same way. Since they're not involved in the college itself, they're just people from the neighborhood working on their language skills sometimes. It is just improving general writing.
But they generally have a product that they're producing.
No, not usually.
You people have some amazing students.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, basically, I just was trying to make the point that by and large, except for the extraordinary students at those schools, we are driven by the tasks we have to do. And seeking help is a natural thing. So we really have to get rid of this, oh God, that person wants me to do their work for them. Oh, by the way, I would love somebody to do my work for me. So we have to sympathize with that. So collaboration may be an illusion, and there is an illusion of that. I mean, I think he's got something there that's very true. I guess I can't look at you, can I? Am I?
What's that?
Is it okay if I look at her? Because I turn away from the mic?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. I need eye contact. So I think the word illusion is... There we are. But it's real. I mean, basically that person, unless they're writing in a group, is still going to be responsible for that product. So there's that part that's not collaborative. But if there's an interaction and it's not a one-way street, and you give the person a lot of choices, and they make choices, there has to be some collaboration. So yeah, I think he's right that there is and there isn't.
Well, thanks, Ryan.
Is Ryan here?
No, sadly no.
Oh, good, because he would say, no way.
This one actually comes from someone.
Harvard? Would you follow the microphone?
All right. So we actually have a question from someone in the audience. His name is Joshua Young. He's actually a poet, a screenwriter, an instructor, a Pushcart Prize nominee. His 4th book of poetry is coming out? 3rd book, sorry, I gave you an extra book. Anyway, he's an all-around good guy, but he has this great question. He wants to know what you think about the gap between writing center pedagogy and composition courses. Like, is there a gap? And if so, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
I don't know about a good thing or bad thing. I think there are gaps. And one of the things that I prize so much in writing centers is that we work with one person. and we work with who that person is in that context, with that assignment, at that moment, given what that person wants to know, given what the person doesn't want to know, given how our personalities react. There's so much going on that I have to pay attention to, and my attention is solely on that person. I don't know how classroom teachers do that. In fact, I had started out in the classic way as a faculty wife, and I came running in with my new PhD in Renaissance literature, and the department chair fell off the floor laughing. You know, it's like we really have 2 people signed up for one guy's Renaissance seminar. You have no business being here, but you could teach composition. And I actually walked into a composition classroom. My entire training was they handed me a textbook and said, "There's your mailbox, and don't make any waves." And I looked at all those people, and I thought, I don't know what they know. I don't know how to help them. And I clutched. I mean, I'm not a classroom teacher. I think there are great classroom teachers. I admire them deeply, and they do a lot of good things. I don't know what they do, so I can't compare them, because I don't understand classroom pedagogy. I really, really prize the difference that we work with, and we don't know enough about difference. We don't know how people take in information. We don't know how they cognitively deal with it. We don't know all their affective things. We don't know their cultural background. We don't know sociologically who they are. We don't know the audience they're writing from. And all those things need attention for that person at that time. I don't know how we do that in classrooms. We talk about the same things, but they have to be different. I mean, I just assume the interaction is different. And what Tatiana was just saying about authority, there's an authority that the student works with that we are playing against. So that's me, seems like a difference. Plus, we are not judgmental. We are not part of that process that counts. I mean, what they're looking for is the grade. And so we are not the authority, we're not the editor. So I see a lot of differences, but the interesting thing is we're all talking about rhetorical skills, about different ways of approaching audiences. So we have a common topic, but coming at it from a different way. Does that help any?
Yeah, well, I think since working writing, I also teach too, so I use a lot of writing for pedagogy in my classroom. And I don't like the idea of I don't like the idea of authority in the classroom. I like it to be peer, more like peer work in the classroom, more like a writing center, just more people. So I use a lot of what I've been writing.
But how do you play against the authority? You are the person who gives them the grade, and you are the person who gives them the assignment.
I don't lecture. I sit down with them. Little things like that. I mean, I don't believe in grades either, so that's also a little bit.
I admire that deeply.
Yeah, I do. Little things that make them feel like I'm not this know-it-all teacher who lectures. I let them tell me about the chapters they read and then ask them questions rather than, this is what we read, this is what it means. I think I learned most of that from working in writing centers.
Did you ever feel, when I used to talk, we had both undergraduates and graduate students, and the graduate students were also walking down the hall and becoming a teacher. And they said no matter what they did, when they walked into the classroom, they couldn't be that same person as they were in the writing lab. Do you feel that there's still something missing in the classroom?
I think no. I think you can be the person you go in the hallway. I think that's a myth. I think you can be just a peer in the classroom, and there's already that set authority. If you study this, you're teaching, you can still work on a peer-like level with your students. I don't know if other people agree with me, but that's how I feel.
I respect that totally, and a question I have is, what if someone isn't doing well in the class, and you really are hesitant thinking, should I really let that person go on to another semester, or will they succeed? How do you play against that, or how do you cope with that?
I talk to them. No, I don't warn. I get them to talk like, hey, this is what you expect. This have attendance. You have to do this work on that. But I talk them through it rather than like, you're gonna fail if you do this. It's more like a discussion. What do you need from me? What aren't you getting from the class? Rather than like, you're not needing this.
I can see people taking notes. Anybody else want to get in that conversation? It's a serious problem if you're also teaching and tutoring.
difference between being knowledgeable and being authoritative.
Well, that's a beautiful thing. Put that on the wall somewhere.
I both teach and tutor, and I like to think that in class I'm not cracking whips or making people uncomfortable, because my goal is for people to be comfortable and have a sense of we're all writers together, and I'm the teacher because I have more experience being a writer than they do. And you can't get away from the necessity of giving grades if you're teaching, but you don't have to make grades the focus of the kind of commentary that you give people. You can put the emphasis on subtleties about the writing and how to improve it and the interesting things that are going on, and you can encourage and praise people in class and not just criticize them. And I think that all of those techniques go a long way to helping writers both feel comfortable and make more progress.
I really like that you could be knowledgeable but not authoritarian. I would take that away from you. Anybody else have any comments about that?
I show my classes peer-reviewed articles that have come back with suggestions for revisions, you know, 2 single-spaced pages of things to change, and then I show them what changes I made, because I still do some handwriting editing.
I know what that is, I bet the youngins don't. Handwriting.
Yeah.
Indiana, by the way, has taken that out of the school curriculum.
Handwriting?
Yeah.
Well, they might as well take mine out anyway. But it helps them to see that I may have more experience, but it's the same process, and that I'm really not asking them to do anything out of the ordinary. I'm asking them to be adults, and I'm a little over the years, so I have a little more trouble on that, but I work hard at that. And I also put a lot more emphasis on assignments and teamwork in class, rather than lecturing. I don't lecture on it.
And it's interesting now that out in the business world, more and more places are working in groups when people write things. And I don't know what's going on in the classroom world and whether they're really showing people how to write either collaboratively or in groups. I was aware that early on when engineers, once they graduate, have to work in projects, and there are project managers. Oh, just actually a nice little story you could all revel in. My husband's, he's also retired now, but he was in the physics department. And they had a dinner one night with a returning PhD who had founded some company out in Colorado and was doing marvelously, and obviously they invited him back so he would make a donation. And people were curious at the dinner when he was speaking, and they said, what do you think we haven't prepared these students enough for? And he said, they don't know how to read the assignments. And I just gaggled. I was just sitting there quietly being the wife. And he said, I have these project people, and I send them out in a project. I know what is being asked for. They don't seem to understand, and they come back with inappropriate things that were not the project. So learning to work in groups is just incredibly important. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that you also brought up was the idea of, earlier you mentioned different cultures and their attitudes and expectations in an academic setting.
Yeah.
For a lot of students who are from Eastern cultures or from the Arabic world, there's a lot more, in certain regards, of a demand at times for a more traditionally structured class, which I think still can allow for your type of teaching, though it just has to be explained and brought in as part of the cultural explanation of why this is beneficial for them as a learner, why this is beneficial in an educational setting. I think just that's one other issue that I think has to be dealt with in terms of the divide between, well, this is more the student-teacher divide rather than the teacher the writing center divide. But going back towards the teacher and writing center divide, I have heard some instructors think about our position as being that where the mechanics, more of the local concerns, more of the cosmetics or whatever application we're wanting to refer to them as, are worked on. And I know that, and I overheard the question that you guys are going to ask about that later, so I'm just going to wait with bated breath until that comes about.
Oh, let's hear it from you. So
No, I do not want to steal any bit of thunder.
Yeah, he's bigger than us, both of us.
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't think we cross Parker.
Nah.
Well, but sentence error problems are quantifiable, objective. I can spot a spelling error. I can't quite quantify lack of clarity. And I was also going to mention, you brought up an incredibly important aspect of cultural differences in rhetoric. We work with an American rhetoric, and what we value is sometimes not valued in other cultures. And I worked in a writing center at a university which had almost the largest number of international students. People would come just to this country to get an education and go back to their home country. So they came from wildly different rhetorical cultures, and they weren't necessarily interested in the American value of rhetoric. And I felt like, should I be teaching them that? Should I introduce them, other than saying, look, here in America, this is what we do. You don't want to do, what do you do in your language? And I have to let them make the comparison. And there are all kinds of obvious comparisons that we all know. Coming out with a thesis statement in the first paragraph is really inappropriate. You lead your audience along to our organization and so on. There's so many things that we are just different about, the different generations of pricing things. And I remember Asian students that would bug me. I've used this word, I can't use that word again because you don't repeat a word apparently. That's considered an inadequate vocabulary. And you have to be alive to those differences. I don't know how classroom teachers cope with that. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you didn't at all.
And then you get on to the important aspect of how do we deal with mechanics? How do we deal with the teachers who are demanding the mechanics? Anyone have any suggestions? I don't. I never won.
Cattle prods.
I once asked somebody who was in the department I was in, who runs the, we called it the ESL program, and I'm sure it has other names now, multilingual programs, people who come from other languages. And he came to staff meeting once because we always had this classic problem, I don't know if you suffer from it. When someone's writing in English, which is not their first language or they're not comfortable in, there's all kinds of mistakes. What do you pay attention to first? And one of the things he kept saying to us is, you have heard people speak with foreign accents. Oh yeah, we all have. Does it bother you? No. Well, then why does it bother you in writing? And I thought, oh, I would never say that to a teacher, but it's true. Why does it bother us that some people have a slightly different rhetoric? But I remember teachers who told students they were less than adequate because they didn't know where to put the comma, or they missed the articles which don't exist in their language, or the verb tense markers aren't in their language as information rich as they are in our language. That's an accent. And he always kept saying, go for the global errors, and we all nodded in agreement. Well, you're absolutely right, but that person has to go back to a different environment. We need to tackle the problem at a different end. And someone who comes from a different culture down south where they live by aphorisms, I don't, but it was lovely. And he said, you can't keep swatting the mosquitoes when you need to drain the pond. And when you think about it, we need to drain the pond. And we were having a discussion over that fantastic pizza about what it means to be either a faculty person or a staff person in a writing center, and how much we could speak to the faculty and what respect we can garner for what we want to say, to explain to them there are things, if you're not making sense in this paper, what difference does it make if you don't know where the commas go? We're facing a problem which we haven't solved, but I think it's an important one. I'm sorry, go ahead. He just really raised about so many good issues that we all deal with.
No, it's better if it's organic, definitely.
Oh.
We were actually curious, kind of going with this many hats and many negotiations, what kind of places can writing centers collaborate with? Is places within our institutions, between institutions, where do you see this working? Who should we be reaching out to?
Well, we should be reaching out to a lot of people who don't want to reach out to us. I don't know your experience, but how many people have adaptive services for the physically handicapped in their schools? Are they eager and willing to come over and help you? Okay, by and large. We kept asking for learning difficulties and physical handicaps. I mean, physical you can see when someone's deaf or in a wheelchair, you have to overcome physical difficulties. But for example, one of the classic questions is, how do you spot dyslexia? And they essentially had no information for us, but they deal with it, and they say only by testing. And so we were up against a difficult question. I would call upon these people every year for staff meetings to come in and talk to us. So we didn't always get the most helpful answers. And then we had a psych services. Do any of you have psych services on your campus where the graduate students are training to be psychologists or clinical psychologists, and they actually see students? Do any, do you call on them? What do they? What kinds of what do they do to help you?
Well, we typically have some kind of. It usually gets relegated to an individual session, but if they're going to come to us, you've got to deal with all sorts of confidentiality concerns and state and national. I mean, it's pretty complicated. So their best advice is encourage the student to come to us rather than try to
And we can't refer them.
Yeah.
They have to be self-referrals. We had that problem many times. I could think of one example where the tutor said every time this person comes in, she's writing about suicide. Yet we couldn't do anything about it, but we kept asking, and when they came to talk to us at staff meetings, they would have to come and talk to them. But then at other times we got great advice. I very often used to ask people from psych to come over, because those working in the field of clinical psychology, where they meet one-on-one with people, face a lot of the similar situations. People under stress, people resistant to help. And one of the great little shorthand things we had was his advice about the yeah butters of the world. You offer some advice and they say, yeah, but. And then you say, well, why don't you? Yeah, but. Well, why don't you try revising? Yeah, but. And they resist you by yeah, butting. And so how do you work with yeah butters? How do you work, because they face these similar things, how do you work with people with unrealistic goals? How many people have you seen whose paper is due the next hour? And you say, if we only had 2 weeks, 3 appointments, we could work unrealistically. And he was this one person who was so wise. He was head of the clinic for a while, and we kept calling him back all the time. And I loved his advice with that. He said, the first thing you do is acknowledge the wish. Yeah, I really wish we could fix this paper because I know it's due in 2 hours. His advice was that the other person wants to know that you heard them. Acknowledge the wish, acknowledge the problem. Yeah, it's only 2 hours, we haven't got time, and you have a class next hour. What's the realistic goal? And then let them set the goal. There's so many logical things that people in clinical psych can help us with in learning how to gain tutorial strategies. So psych services, the international people are marvelously helpful. I don't think we always appreciate people coming from other countries and the difficulties they're having. We started and became wildly successful at just a little private conversation hours where we'd invite people in, and one of us, they always wanted a native speaker, to just come in and talk with them for an hour, just conversation where they could practice their skills. And one of the grad tutors realized there are so many little things in a different country that you don't know. What do you do when you answer the phone? Or what do you do when you want to go through the telephone tree if they haven't met a telephone tree before? What do you do when? And there's all kinds of little scripts that we follow that are different in other countries, which if you've traveled in another country, you know how you've goofed by using your American scripts. You're smiling. Do you ever got one to offer us?
I was made responsible for answering the telephone in a company in Germany. Yeah, that was interesting. They didn't quite know what to make of me.
We just don't know, and so they were so eager to learn that. So the people in the International Center, that's what they call it there, were helpful about the little life problems that these people have. For example, if they came from a country where there had been a very authoritarian country, when the bursar or somebody else asked for their ID, that was a scary situation in the home country, having to show your papers. And you have to realize that when you're asking them to sign in and they use their ID numbers or whatever, that's a little bit like, show your papers. And it's a little traumatic, and so you have to, at your reception desk, watch the way you ask people for data. So there are many little things that they overcome that we didn't realize. Yeah, so there's International Center I used to ask. Well, I used to ask a lot of the other people around campus. The admissions department, because a lot of our people were going on to grad school, and the scholarship essays that they had to write, the fellowship, the grad school applications. And they frequently came in, and I discovered that every one of them looks for something different. It depends on who came from admissions to talk to us and what we heard. Some people said, the vet school doesn't want to hear about anybody who had a little puppy when she was growing up and wants to be a veterinarian because she loved her puppy. And so we thought, okay, so they're just talking about that, and someone else came in and said exactly the opposite. If they worked with horses and they tell us they liked horses, that's just great because they've got experience. So you just heard things all over the place. They were less than helpful. But then people from other departments where we saw a lot of their students. We had a huge influx of nursing students, which I gather don't exist here. No, here at Columbia. But in other schools, nursing people are very aware of communication problems, and they have differentiated audiences. How does a nursing student, and also the pharmacy people were very busy with this, how do they talk to doctors versus how do they talk to patients? When you're talking with patients, how do you get them to follow directions, to comply is their word, how does the patient comply? So we had to listen to them and the way they do things. And then we offered them services in return. We would help them structure assignments, figure out portfolios. So you kind of go around your campus, and because you're interacting with everybody on your campus. And then I went to the engineering departments, and I was given 10 minutes one morning to tell them all about good writing. And it was only one of the schools of engineering. And so I just said, well, why don't you tell me what you think good writing is, and we'll start from there. And they told me things about engineering writing that I was totally unaware of. For example, in lab reports, the person who stood up and looked at me and said, verb tense is the most important thing they can't get straight. What happened when, before what? And when they use the past perfect, I need to know this happened before that happened. And so I was set for all kinds of other things, and then somebody else stood up and said something else. So we have to gather information everywhere. And the business people are very good at telling you what should be in the resumes. So you pick up expertise from it all over. It probably was a longer list than you wanted.
It's a good list. And actually that kind of segues into the next question is, so like gathering all this expertise from all over the place, what about the foundation? What's like the ideal tutor training? We know it's changed a lot since, writing centers kind of came to be, I think we all probably read Stephen North, and then we all probably read his 10 years later when he's like, let's revisit this idea, so.
Could I add a postscript to that, which is Jeannie Simpson's Whose Idea of a Writing Center?
Yeah.
She did a marvelous article on, what's your idea? It may not be Stephen North's, it may not be his second idea, but what's the other idea? And people live now in different kinds of writing centers. So there's post-North now.
Right. But like what should it look like? Like what should the basic building blocks look like in 2013?
Wow, okay. How many of you feel that your writing center belongs in the context of your institution and it has to fit in your institution? So I could tell you what fit in at Purdue, but I can't tell you what fit in at Glen Ellen or North Park. I don't know. Is it a school with a lot of technology? Are these students doing CAD/CAM design? Are they writing multimodal papers? How many people have heavy technology at their school?
How many have what?
Heavy technology use. and people doing multimodal presentations now.
Well, I think that would be Columbia.
Yeah, so you would have to have highly well-trained tutors working with multimodal presentations.
Well, they're working with the writing within the multimodal presentation, sure.
Yeah, so that would be ideal for your setting. For the setting I was in, there was a lot of technical writing on paper, engineers, computer scientists, chemists, physics, biology people, all of whom were doing reports, lab reports, projects. So I would talk an awful lot about training in group work. We had a large population of ESL, so that was important. So I'm trying to think of Leahy's first name. John Leahy, David Leahy, who said all writing centers are local. And they are local in that sense, in the same way that all politics is local. You design the ideal center. I always talk a lot about doing research in the writing center, because you're all doing research. You have to know who your students are, you have to know how to set your priorities, all the work you do to find out about your institution and its mission and how you work with it. You have to find out those things, then work backwards. What do your tutors need? What are the teachers asking the students to do? So you shape your perfect training to the institution that needs you. Does that make sense? So there is no perfect one because we're all different. You see how I'm evading everything he asks? Because we all want to know what's the perfect training. And I always wondered about people who said, can I have your syllabus for tutor training? And they work at a different school. How could that be? Because I don't know that they ever did the two alike. We haven't had a chance to listen to other people. Anybody else want the conversation to turn elsewhere and talk about things that you want to talk about? That pizza's really getting to you, isn't it? Okay, let's carry on by ourselves.
Maybe one of these questions will be something you want to know more about. Actually, our next question is about building a sense of community within the Writing Center and maintaining communities of scholarship. Like, how does that work? How can you maintain that? I know we took you through our Writing Center, and you definitely were talking about how how does the sense of community work here?
We can hear you now.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're talking to each other. We're having a great conversation over here. You're welcome to join us.
So I was trying to ask her about the sense of community, building and maintaining a sense of community in writing centers, and also having a community of scholarship within the Writing Center, constantly active, and what our thoughts are about that.
And this depends partly on the personality of the director. For those of you who like big open spaces where everybody's gathered together, you want a place that's very open and all the tables are in some communal setting so we can talk to each other. But I'm very aware that there are other people who very much like the little closed-in pods or cubicles or whatever, where just two people have the privacy to talk to each other, and I respect that. It just doesn't happen to be, in my sense, what works well. How many of you prefer an open place? How many of you really prefer the cubicle things?
We like the pods.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, we love the pods.
We love the pods.
So community is built in different environments. Some people like openness, some people like privacy. And so part of what ideal community is, where do you build your community that is most comfortable for all of you? But then there's all kinds of other community times, coming together to plan, to solve problems. One of the earliest things we did, and I actually was honored in a way, I come from a non-Yiddish speaking background, my grandparents did, but so I only have the leftover words that I can insult people with, and a few other words. But we always had kvetch sessions. Does the word kvetch mean anything to you? It's not just complaining. It's kind of, oh, good. Oh, why do they do that? It's kind of whining, kvetching. And we would close the doors at some point, you know, if there was, whenever the staff meeting started, and just have a kvetch session. That is so bonding. it is so good just to open up and complain to everybody else about what you've been through for the day. And so there are little things that you just build into your day. You two just developed that screen with the tutor pictures. There are projects around that you just do things together, and you have pizza together, you have parties. But I think you're asking actually a different kind of thing about scholarship. When I first started our writing center with a couple graduate students, none of us had a clue as to what a writing center was. They were in literature backgrounds, there was no Red Comp in the school. But I really deeply wanted this tutorial center, and as a faculty wife, they let me volunteer my time one summer start. And so the four of us were sitting at a table, and we said, what if somebody comes in and asks me for parallel structure? I know what it is, but I have no idea how to explain it. Or what if somebody asks me about blah or something? We start tossing around subjects, and we said, let's make handouts. At that time, there were handouts. And so we made a lot of handouts, which in secret were cheat sheets, because we could whip it out of the drawer and then put it on the table. You know, here's the 7 ways you use the comma, or all the things that we needed, that we sort of know, because everybody who's a good writer sort of knows it, and they all knew it, but they didn't know how to explain it. So we began doing all these handouts, which eventually became this online owl. And then we realized that once we did, that they weren't always working, because if you read Donald Shern, I love his ideas of reflective engagement, reflective action. You think while you're doing things about what actually is happening to you. And we were using these handouts saying, oh, it's not working because of reason A or reason B, or I met this kid in the tutorial and this didn't work. So we were revising handouts at staff meetings. And what we were doing was building scholarship strategies for understanding instructional development. And I forgot, early on, Purdue had an instructional development department, which disappeared, but they would come in and talk to us about instructional development. And when one person came in, he was amazed at how we were working on handouts. He said, that's instructional development. And I hadn't realized that we were doing this, but we were discussing things in ways that made so much sense as to what we were doing in terms of scholarly work. And in fact, one of my first articles, which I really loved, there was an Office of Writing Review next door. Purdue at one time tested all the graduate students who didn't have a high enough GRE score, and they had to produce 1,000 words or 2,000 words in 3 hours, and they were scored. And so they were all marked papers, because this really, you could not do your thesis until you passed this certification exam. And I just went in there once because our fragment sheet wasn't working. And he said, this is not there. So I said, well, let's just figure out what fragments are. And I went into this Office of Writing Review, pulled out a couple hundred papers, collected all the things that had been marked fragments, and looked at them, and almost none of them were what textbooks say. Almost all of them are the little string of absolutes at the beginning, or the thing at the end of the sentence, the misplaced modifiers, or the dangling stuff at the end, you know, I went so and so, and then a little clause at the end, but it got so long they got nervous, so we stuck in a period. And that's really what fragments are about. So we were doing linguistic analysis, and I wrote some article, mending the free modifier or something like that. And they began doing this, and so we were all working on understanding the ways that people make mistakes just because we were doing handouts. Which, by the way, the linguists, I mean, a couple people in there became linguists because they got so interested in language analysis. And we talked about interaction between gender, and you do a little sociology, you do a lot of work which eventually develops into kind of scholarly pursuits. And we did a lot of that together. And because we're honestly helping each other, and I think one of the greatest things we did was when we had this online owl, there was a chance to get a couple $100 in a grant, and I said, great, I'll write it, but what do we want? And we said, well, let's just get some machinery that we can have fun with, which was fun. But then we began thinking, what can you do early on with technology? And began exploring the uses of technology. And so we thought we could do this, and we could do that, and we could do the other. So they were beginning to perceive how online instruction works, which is a very scholarly. And one guy eventually did his dissertation on the owl, just watching how it developed. So as you're growing your writing lab, you're doing a lot of scholarly work. And we used to have intense discussions on the difference between your online center and your writing center. Are they different entities? Are they viewed differently? What is visual literacy? How do you look at something versus how do you talk about something? So there's so much that you're analyzing just to run your center, which becomes conference presentations, become articles, become dissertations. So a lot of what you're doing is scholarly already. So I would say just do it in the process of making your writing center a better writing center.
Do you have any
Tatiana's looking
questions?
kind of dubious about that.
No, actually, and they're awesome. And we have some of their mentees, and they do projects together, and that, oh, sorry. And so that's a really cool thing is tutors mentoring other tutors in a way to get them involved in the community, to understand more about the Writing Center. It also handles a bunch of administrative things, but we've found that while you're cobbling the program together, many things come up that we want to talk about. So we've definitely gone to conferences just to deal with the problems that we've tried to overcome in the mentoring program. So, and I think that's also how some of our graduate conferences came about too, is just the problems that we were trying to figure out. How do we deal with these junior administration roles and stuff like that? So I definitely agree. Problems breed conference papers.
And that's good scholarship. That's not empty scholarship. That is scholarship in progress that you need. That's the best kind of scholarship.
Well, I know I certainly needed it, so
Yeah.
I mean, it was great to me.
Yeah.
And
Could I hear what Parker does?
Yeah, well, so last year I was actually looking at all the undergraduates, and I was observing them during a session. I'd write up kind of like what I noticed, what they were doing, and then we would talk about it. It was really interesting because every single session that I observed, I saw something different. And I saw things I was like, oh, I like the way you did that, or that was a really great way of wording that, or I would have never thought to have done that at the beginning of a session. And it was just these great things because, you know, I was trained 5 years ago, and then I was retrained again for a week. But yeah, but still, I mean, like, you know, it's, you have these people that come in and they have these different experiences and these different backgrounds, whether they're film majors or they're writing majors or they're, you know, visual artist majors, and they have different ways of looking at things. So when they tutored the students, it's different. So it was like super beneficial. And so then actually I was given the opportunity to write a paper and present it at a conference last year, which was about kind of things that maybe could change in a writing center. And maybe like the ways, things that maybe we should be looking at. Sorry, I thought I'd talk loud.
Are you all hearing us?
Do you have your hand up? No? Okay. I thought you wanted to say something.
She's trying to scratch her head, literally.
I don't really remember what the question was.
Well, but what you're doing is investigating and coming up with scholarly answers based on what you're doing, your research, right?
Oh, absolutely. And like a lot of the grad tutors, when we're bored, we'll just get around and talk, and then we'll usually get really passionate about grammar. I'll get really passionate about grammar. And they'll tell me I'm dumb for getting passionate about it. Not really, they'll say it nicer. But yeah, like we'll just sit and talk and snowball ideas, which is great because it makes us, I think, better tutors.
And it's also building community.
It is.
Yeah.
We were walking around earlier, we were showing her our space, and I'm on the same page with you. I like the open space. I like to be able to like listen in other tutor sessions, because that's how I learned. I'm just like, oh, Tatiana, like that was awesome. Like the way you handle that situation, or the way you talk to that student, or the way you were able to get them to open up to you. And I think that when it's closed off, you don't get that. So I think that like the community building is really, really super important within the space itself.
I actually heard the same thing from a lot of the students, grad students and undergraduates. Well, we shared a common space, but the undergraduates kind of stayed in the corner because they were intimidated by the grad students. But they picked up strategies from each other, and sometimes you desperately need somebody else. If I've been reading a paper written by somebody whose first language is not English, and we're suddenly in some sort of preposition question, I have lost it. I just need to ask somebody else, what is the right preposition? Because I've lost my grasp on how to say it, because we've been working with prepositions that didn't sound right to me. So you lean across the table and you have somebody else say, oh no, what you really want to do is, or an assignment that I didn't understand, and I could just find somebody else who had worked with that kind of paper. He said, oh, and he would come over, and the three of us would have a session. And hearing each other, I learned a ton of strategies from people. But I also learned that the strategies matched the person. We had one guy who was a Marine before he came to graduate school. And I guess Marines really lay down the law. And they have to get away with it. I mean, they really do it. And he did it so well. He never offended a student. But he would say, we have 30 minutes, and here's what we can get done in 30 minutes, so you really need to tell me what's going on. And then at 25 minutes into the session, he said, well, we only have 5 minutes left, so how are we going to wind this up? And he kept them in a regimen. I am incapable of that. I mean, as you notice, my mouth runs. I mean, my whole family has diarrhea in the mouth. Well, just a talkative family. And we talk too fast. So we listen to strategies, and then we have to learn to match them with our personalities. And I bet you heard things that you thought, that's great, but I couldn't pull that off.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How many of you have places where you could hear each other tutor? Anyone want to tell us the other kinds of things you can share across tutoring places? I'm sorry, we're all looking at you. You never know what you do when you raise your hand.
Yeah, well, we do have cubicles or pods as the, movable partitions now, but we can hear each other. And there are occasions where someone knows that somebody else will be good to answer the question, or something comes up that there's a debate about, and so someone will call over and bring a third person in for a discussion. I know I've been both the requester and the requested on quite a few occasions to just discuss something that popped up or answer a question.
And that actually works against the authority problem that we were worried about before. If the student sees that you also don't know the answer to that, and you're modeling behavior, ask somebody. Yeah, I think that's a nice technique, is just actually sometimes to turn around and get somebody else involved in the conversation.
I use drop-on Parker all the time. It's brilliant. If you haven't done it yet, give yourself a little lesson there.
And by the way, linguists go hysterically crazy over linguistic problems. There are a couple of different discussion groups actually in LinkedIn, and they call themselves grammar geeks. And they've been arguing over a bunch of things lately.
I mean, my excitement thing over the summer was I was helping develop the new website, and Grammar Girl emailed me. Yeah, that happened. I was really excited. Do you know who Grammar Girl is? She does these weekly podcasts about grammar.
Oh, Grammar Girl.
Yeah, she's great, and I was super excited.
One of the discussions on right now is email hyphenated or not hyphenated?
It is not anymore.
Is hyphenated? No?
A lot of times it's not, but different style guides will have different things, and it's always one of the words you have to look up if you're working with somebody's style.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I have a textbook, the Protocol Reference Guide, and it is so corporate. I have to tell you that textbooks are so corporate now. They really run the show. And I was just poking the new editor to see if he would actually allow a little freedom in the book. And I said, the split infinitive is really, the rule about split infinitives is artificial. And he said, yeah, but we can't do that because no one in the textbook talks about that. So we have to, And I said, and I just dared him with one of my classics. How do you not split the phrase to more than double your income? You have to split that damn infinitive. There's just no way. So there are rules, there are artificial rules, and they're all under discussion, and it's fun. Language is so much fun. Yeah.
All right, right up there. Okay, so actually we were talking when we were preparing, we were trying to figure out how we got to our best learning experiences. And we found that it was the anecdotes that we were telling each other was the way that, in the end of the day, we learned how to deal with the most difficult, complicated, emotionally challenging, intellectually challenging things. So we were just hoping that you would share one of your best anecdotes, be it funny, tragic, just full of insight. Any place in between the laughter, the crying. But if there's one that you tend to tell that...
Well, let me backtrack, because this is really interesting. Several of us are so old that people are doing dissertations about us. I mean, that's really scary. You know, you have to pack it in. And okay, one anecdote, side note to that. We're also in town because our grandson is being bar mitzvahed this weekend. And about a year or so ago, he came up to me and he said, Safta, you're really adorable. And I said, oh, you know, thank you. And he said, yeah, you're so wrinkled. You know, thanks a lot, kid. There goes your birthday present. But anecdotes are incredibly important, and this came up just recently. So I was talking about these people who are doing dissertations about people. Someone's doing a dissertation about Jeannie Simpson, Harvey Kale, and me, and talking about the intersection between theory and practice. And so we were having a phone conversation. He's somewhere in Iowa, I think, Arkansas, whatever. And he said, are you aware of the fact that you use a lot of anecdotes and stories in your writing? And do you purposely do that? And I thought, I have no idea. I wasn't even aware of that. And then just recently, there was a very interesting discussion on NPR about how people process information. And they were talking about the fact that we all tell stories. Stories is how we make sense out of reality. And I thought, that's it. We tell stories because that's the way we make sense of reality. And in our world, there are 12,000 different stories every day. I always think that every person coming in the door has a different dissertation to study. Every person you meet has a little story to tell. Is there some news program that does this? People go out and have people tell stories, their stories. What are the national story? Yeah. So we tell stories, but we tell them particularly in writing centers because that's how we're making sense out of the reality of each of these people. The stories that they tell us, and then we work with their stories. And then, and this is the irony of it, we get slammed because we don't do quantifiable research. We just tell anecdotes, we just tell stories. And I think, my God, of course we tell stories. Because we hear stories, because we're making sense out of reality in stories. We're acquiring differences through stories. How do we mold that into a theory? We just have stories. I would love, for example, to hear some stories from some of you, because I think that's one of the beautiful things we could share. Anyone want to start with just a story? Something funny, some little anecdote that happened to you just recently that you're going to share.
Nobody has a story?
You all have stories, you just don't want to share them.
Most embarrassing moment? That time that student stormed out of the writing center on you?
I can tell a story.
All right.
Silence makes me nervous.
That's why he ends.
I had a student that she came into the writing center and she was always on her phone. Like, it was one of those things where you have to come in for 12 sessions for the semester and she just didn't want to be there. But we had both kind of noticed when I kind of got her to open up that she wasn't writing thesis statements. And so I was trying to explain to her what one was, and she just kind of wasn't like, she was like, I just don't get like why we need them. And I noticed that when she was always on her phone, she was always on Facebook or Twitter. So I was like, it's a tweet. Tweet what your paper's about. Like, write it in a Twitter, you can use Twitter vernacular, you can use the number of, but you have to have 140 characters. So like, I challenged her to do that, and within like 15 minutes, she had an awesome thesis statement. So it was like kind of one of those things where I found a way to connect on her level. You know, she was always on these social media platforms. How can I use that? I mean, like, that wouldn't work for every student, but for her it worked. Other stories.
I love that story. I like just learned something. I would have never thought to
that's where she is.
So if I'm tutoring at work, that's research, right?
No other stories?
I have one, and I have 1,000. But I just remember when you were saying something about one of the most embarrassing. Some guy looked at me while we were working, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I have TB." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know what that had to do with the paper." And he looked at me, and I said, "I really, really have TB." And I said, "I'm sorry. Why do I need to know that?" He said, "Because I have to get to the bathroom. Tiny bladder." I didn't know. Is this current in his generation? I don't know. And I guess we could have turned that into lingo that's not wildly shared, but TB is...
How many do that? How many do TB with tiny bladder? All right. See, there you go.
So he was talking in private lingo, and had I thought of it at the moment, I was just so startled. We could have talked about private language and public language. We need more stories.
We have some writing center directors over here. Any good stories?
Oh,
I'm going to put you on the spot.
I see a wicked laugh. That's a story.
It doesn't have to be yours.
Yeah.
Well, we get some interesting students. We're a community college, and we have a decent number of students with special needs because we interact more with the community, perhaps, than a four-year university might. And so we have our regulars. I'm thinking of someone who has worked with you regularly for how many years?
Probably 3 years.
Probably 3 years. Jeffrey, I shouldn't use his name. The sweetest gentleman. So he stopped and said hello to me the other day, and I don't want to bother you, but you know, I've been working with Mary and I've been working with Karen, and I think he learns about socializing from being in our center so much. Because he went into this discussion, and he's very nice. Now, I just have one more thing to say, he'll say. And, you know, Mary's like this, and Karen's like this, and it's okay if I buy him a Starbucks, you know. It's just
okay with me.
So, Jeffrey's an interesting regular presence in our center as a community college.
And, you know, I guess I could tag on that. It's not an anecdote so much, but I find it's really difficult to get mainstream, if you want to say that, students to come regularly. I do have those regulars who are part of our community of students with special needs, and it is partly because it's social for them. And I don't know what the difference is. A number of years ago, I had a student who did come very regularly, and there was such satisfaction in watching that grow. And I guess I struggle with how do we engage the students so that they want to come regularly instead of just in a panic that, you know, I have this paper due. Does anybody have any clues about that?
I remember a strategy that one grad student taught us. She said she'd never let students go when they needed to come back before they said, she said, "So what are we going to do next time? How will we be working on this?" And she would walk them up to the front desk where the appointments were made. I don't know how many she got to do that, but I thought it was a pretty attractive, a possible strategy.
So if you had a question, it was how do we engage students to come back for repeat visits?
How do we engage them to come back?
For like repeat visits, like to make it kind of like what, like to make it like a routine, I guess.
Like a weekly?
Oh,
Well, aside from that,
The one student that I really had do that was one of our ESL students, and a lot of it was because of the language difficulty she was having. So it was really obvious to me to see her papers progress. But you know, we'll go out and we'll have orientations in classrooms or have them come into our center. And I know when I'm doing that, I try to emphasize the idea that you know, writing's a process. It's not this you know, this one-time event that you're doing, and to get the most out of it, come back, you know, come back 2, 3 times with these papers. And it happens sometimes, but I just wonder how we can, I don't know. encourage it more?
Well, when I worked at the Writing Center at University of Iowa, we didn't require that students come in for weeklies like we do here at Columbia. So it was a lot more rare for students to come back in week after week. But I had a couple of those students that they would come back week after week and semester after semester. And I found really that it's a lot about just the student's personality, and it's a lot just about how whether or not they want to succeed, and really if they feel that they can benefit from the help. And I think that part of our job is to make it clear what we really can do to help the students, and to individualize that message, right? So like I had a student yesterday who was required to come for a weekly, and he said, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I feel that I don't need your help. And so I said, okay, well, what do you want to do with this time? And he was like, well, I would just like to use this time to write. And I was like, okay, that's fine. You can come in and write for 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking. And so he was like completely fine with that. After that, he even almost seemed like happy to start writing, and I came back and I was like, how are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm having so much fun writing this. And I was like, okay, great. So I think that part of our job is to individualize the message that we can help people in different ways and not strictly across the board in the same manner.
I think a lot of this also relates back to this whole idea of where we place ourselves in relation to being here or some sort of authority.
I use the Writing Center and enjoy my time at the Writing Center. And then I tell them about that. And I have definitely come with papers for my peers as a graduate student. I once came with something that I was sure everything needed to be saved. It was, I had laid it across my kitchen, cut it up, pasted it together with tape. I'm sure you guys have done this, the heavy editing. I couldn't figure out a way to gather it. I put it in a bag, I brought it into the Writing Center, brought it to a tutor. The tutor said, no. And that was how I wrote my paper. So I share these stories because I feel that the Writing Center is just a place for people to talk about writing, and that's what I need too. So that's all I got, but it helps.
Other questions or stories? Funny jokes?
What does that mean?
That means 10 minutes.
No, that means 1 minute. No.
1 minute? Looks like 0 or 1. 10.
That's 10.
I have a question actually in response to something that Jordan was saying about establishing peerness. What do you do, and it's a question because I don't know what to do, when part of the peerness is that person is beginning to unload on you and just vent some steam, and we're there to vote where they vent steam too, and they'll sit down and say, teacher hates me. This woman really hates me. And a guy I know sitting across the room writes lousy papers, he gets A's. She really hates me. She's a lousy teacher, she never says anything, she doesn't come to conferences, and he goes on and it gets worse and worse. What do you do?
I've had situations like that before actually, and I feel like coming at this as not only a tutor but I'm also an instructor, I think I can give some good insight and say something to the effect of, what you get out of the class and what you get out of the professor is proportional to what you put in. And so the more we work here and the more we try in these weekly sessions, I think you're going to find that you're going to feel more respected by the professor. And then I'll reassure you that the professor doesn't hate you, but let's try to amend the situation as best we can from our position.
Well, and also I think it's beneficial to encourage that the student communicate directly with the professor. I've definitely had students in the past that have come to me and said, I've been coming to the Writing Center every week and I'm trying really hard, and yet I'm not getting the grades that I think I deserve, and I just don't understand. And so I asked them, well, have you Have you been talking with your professor? Have you been trying to establish communication? And a lot of the time, the answer is no, that they haven't. And so they can communicate with us all day long, and it's really not going to do a whole lot for them in the classroom. So if they're having that miscommunication, that misunderstanding with the professor, it needs to be addressed directly, not just necessarily after class, but in office hours even. So I encourage that.
I sometimes will ask if they have a graded paper or something with comments on it from the professor, and you can look and see what the professor says the student did well. And so you can focus on that. You're like, well, they really liked this and this about your paper. Like, let's look at the prompts and see kind of, you know, where from the prompts led you to write this section or in this way. And then try to, like, target the good things the professor noticed, the things that the student did well, and then kind of...
Yeah, but some professors will never...
Right, exactly. So then that's the problem. So it's like, what did they say you didn't do well? You know, and so it's like, well, and you know, you never want to like say like, oh, the professor's wrong, because they're ultimately the one that's in charge of the grade. So you always want to be like, well, you know, like, why do you think they gave you this grade? Why do you think they mentioned this doesn't fit? Yeah.
Those are the yeah butters. Yeah, but he hates me.
And then you just say, well, let's not talk about that. You know, I don't know. I really don't know. Like, that's a really great question. Like, I'm just like, well, you know, I don't think that's true, but let's
see what we could do.
Let's be productive, you know? I don't know.
You know, sometimes I think they just need somebody else to listen to them, and it feels a little better that somebody acknowledges it, but you can't agree with them. You can't say, yeah, I've heard that person is really... I mean, that's just not our place.
Even if you know. No,
even if you know. There's an ethical question that's, I think, a couple people have been playing with lately on W Center. Student comes in and has written something that you know they are wrong about because you read another paper from that class and you know that they have missed something or the wrong argument. How much do you mess with content by telling them something you know that they don't know? Is it ethical? I have no answer, by the way. I just thought it was an incredibly complex question. And from there, I think they all jumped into, you know, what do you do when they plagiarize? And should you talk about plagiarism?
I think Nita has an answer for us.
I just have a response from being a tutor and a teacher. And if I know that the student isn't writing what the teacher is looking for, then I might ask questions like, do you have the assignment? Let's make sure that it's following the assignment. Then if I know that the content is wrong, that they've completely missed something, taken something out of context, I can only say, I had a different interpretation than you. I know that piece of reading, and this was my interpretation. Have you guys had class discussion? Do you have other interpretations from your classmates? Because I did, as a tutor, when I was at Purdue Cal, and I was a grad student, I tutored somebody, and if anybody has read The Gift of the Magi, how many of you have read it? Okay. I tutored a student who thoroughly believed that, what's the wife's name? Is it like Anna or something like that? Whatever the wife, anyway, she was arguing in her literary analysis of The Gift of the Magi that the woman was a whore, that she sat on the bar stool to make the money, that's how she came up with the money and she cut off her hair to spite her husband. So this was a complete, and I said, are you sure? I've read The Gift of the Magi. Tell me why you think she's a whore sitting on a bar stool. And she proceeded to try and support it with the text, but obviously that was my opportunity to say, well, I think you've kind of taken this out of context if you just read it in this small scope. Yeah, it probably does sound like she hated the man and she just wanted to sleep with everybody at the bar. But in fact, you have to put it back in the context, so then it becomes a discussion about context rather than she really wasn't a whore and you can't say that.
And how did she know he was buying her a phone?
She didn't, it was all about the woman. She was doing like an analysis of the female character. I don't even know, but it has been a while since I was a grad that has ever stuck in my mind was that she thought she sat in the bar all day and sold her body to get the money for the money club. So I think if we can still say, the bottom line, if they want to walk out with that the wife was a whore, that's on them.
Well, the first thing I thought was one of the first times this ever happened to me was a little bit different. You people probably don't have any students, as we do from Indiana, come off the farm and come with some very traditional Bible Belt views. And that's their upbringing, and that's what they believe, and it's not my business. But if someone brought in a paper that was so homophobic, was really homophobic, and he was writing it for a faculty member in a literature class who was gay. I don't remember what I did. I was just, the whole session must have gone badly because I kept thinking, do you really want to write that paper for him? I don't know, do you tell him? And if this guy was so homophobic, he missed the fact that this guy is gay, who is very openly gay.
But did that particular paper even meet the requirements of the assignment anyway?
I just didn't know. I was so busy with it, I don't remember. I just don't remember how I dealt with it because I kept thinking, I don't want to change that guy's view. I don't want him to hate his teacher. I kept cycling. I don't know if people ever get into these things where you can't stop worrying and your mind is going round and round and I'm staring at him but I'm not listening to him because I'm thinking, yeah, well, this guy's gay. What is he going to say? This kid is entitled to his views. Should I try to re-educate him? It was a hopeless tutorial, but I remember walking away from that saying, what is my role? I don't know. I don't know what happened. I never saw the kid again. I'm not sure. I honestly wrote a note to the faculty member that he had seen that I talked to the kid.
Did you try to argue against the notion? Because I remember once I had a student, that was quite some time ago, and I think I did make a mistake. It was a non-Christian Asian student, and the paper was written about Christianity and Catholicism. And the context was totally wrong. In other words, the student did not seem to know, the difference between, or the relationship between Catholicism and Christianity. And I guess I thought it was my place to try to explain. And that was a mistake, because really, I just ended up arguing with her. And afterwards I realized that I should have just left it alone. It was not my place to set her straight, although it seemed so wrong,
But this is such an important question, and I don't know if it's our place or not. I think you're dealing with an incredibly difficult situation.
Yeah.
Someone wants to get in the conversation?
Yeah, I had a student, he was one of my first students, and he came in, he had written a persuasive essay, and it was about, he was writing that abortion is genocide, and it was like a very one-sided argument, and it really when he was explaining it to me, it made me really frazzled, and I wasn't really sure how to approach the situation because of my personal opinions, and I didn't want to. He seemed also very argumentative, so I didn't want to talk a lot about the content because I didn't want him to start arguing with me, which is what he would do when I brought up a comma issue. He would argue it. So I was just I wasn't really sure how to approach the situation, and his references were all kind of religious journals, so it was a really iffy situation, and I ended up just talking to him about the form of his paper and not getting into content, even though his content, his argument was very one-sided and kind of angry. So usually I would bring that up and talk about how to make a good argument. So I felt like I kind of didn't do him justice because I don't know, I wasn't sure how to approach the situation.
But I think that is a good way to approach it, i.e., you don't really have an argument, you have an opinion paper. And so if the goal of the assignment is to be an argument paper, the argument represents both sides. So your sources, you're kind of one-sided on your sources, so have you read other sources? And then how would you incorporate those other sources in your paper? Because an argument is two sides and then stating your opinion. So you could have said you're not writing an argument. Actually, you've written an opinion paper, or, you know, perhaps even a persuasive paper if it's trying to persuade others to think like that.
It's also when you can bring it back to the class and be like, okay, so you write an argument paper. What kinds of argumentative models have you talked about? Have you talked about Rogerian? Have you talked about Toolman logic? Have you talked about ethos, logos, pathos? You know, you can bring those tools into the conversation, and if they're like, I don't know what that means, you're like, okay, well, like, you know, like, what have you been talking about in terms of argumentation? Like, what's been going on in the classroom? And so you can make it more about the rhetoric model as opposed to the actual opinion. And hopefully by doing that, it'll guide them to being like, oh, you're right, I do only have opinion in here. Or you could even like talk about fact-based reasoning versus faith-based reasoning. You know, and you could be like, well, it's interesting that you have these religious journals, but like, you know, what about some from different perspectives? And you can talk about perspective and things like that, and kind of try to guide them to come up with the idea on their own, so you just won't like place it in their head and be like, this is how you should be writing or whatever. You know, you want to be like, well, let's talk about how to bring in other sides and, you know, kind of look at their argument as well. Because like a good argument paper shows different sides of the argument.
That's so nice, because you're introducing them to larger problems. Not just the fact that in this paper, but to the larger context of have you considered what are you doing. That was nice. It's a nice move. Could I ask how you people deal with plagiarism? Silence falls in the room. I'm just curious, but has anyone read recently, by the way, that the Minister of Education in Germany was fired? Is it he or she? I don't know. She apparently had plagiarized something in her dissertation.
That's what she's accused of. She says she hasn't, but I haven't read it up.
She has. So they revoked her PhD, and the Minister of Education is charged with plagiarism. And I actually thought that might be a nice way to talk about plagiarism. It's got consequences. Because the ethics, when people have a paper due tomorrow morning, and it's so easy to download a paper, it's got consequences. You know, you may not be able to appeal to the ethics. And it strikes me the same problem with it, the Christianity thing. How much do we tamper with people's beliefs, their ethical systems, and what do you do in 30 minutes or an hour? Yeah. I'm sorry, Nita, are you making motions at us?
I am kind of making motions. If there are any final thoughts,
Anything else on anyone's mind?
At the beginning of your career, you probably never thought that you would gain as much, to use your reference to the dissertations and so on, attention. Has this been a surprise? And to what degree has your own rise to fame?
I'm sorry, but it's just that I'm older than you and I can't stop writing and I like to talk. So, you know, some of us just hog everybody's attention. And I just think it's very gracious of you, and I'm sorry, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, you know, in this regard, I suppose, you know, everybody knows Purdue and OWL and all the contributions. I don't know how we would run our center without OWL and the significance of what a model that has been for us. Have you seen your career as more of a service? Because a lot of scholars don't. They see it as a kind of free agency to become more independently, you know, significant. And I've never sensed that about you. Even when I wrote for the Writing Lab newsletter, just even your correspondence, you were very human, which well, I thought
that's a sweet way to say, God, does she write too much? I can't stand
it. You seemed very human, and I was surprised by it.
I wanted very much to be a good teacher. We all have our ideals in life, and in my terms, it's called tikkun olam. We're all here to make the world a little better. And I don't have the brilliant skills of my husband. He's a physicist. I don't have the skills of our kids. They're incredible. I don't know genetically how I'm related to them. There's all kinds of things I don't know and can't do. I can't carry a tune. I'm not very clever. I don't have witty retorts the way the other people do. I don't understand politics. I have a lousy memory. But God, I love language, and I love helping people communicate. And the irony of those who
like us who love that is you walk into this writing lab, or writing center. I called it a writing lab because at Purdue there were thousands of centers, the Center for Student Health, the Center for Psychology Center, the Centers for Research. So center just had a different connotation for me. It was, labs were where the kids went into chemistry and broke bottles and did things, and nobody cared what they did, though they had to pay a breakage fee. And so it was a place for you to do things, so that's why I called it a writing lab. And I thought, this is just great. You get to sit down with kids, and Don LeBurry's great comment, they're paying me because I sit in a chair and talk to people. Isn't that amazing? And then as you become a manager, an administrator, it keeps pulling you out of there. So because I really believe that my desk had to be in the lab, because I really need to be where things are happening and listening. I never had to evaluate people because I could hear everything that was going on. And some of us just love tutor talk. Don't you just sit there and love it? So that's where my desk was, because I really loved it. So in order to exist at Purdue, I had to publish. So I had to leave the thing I was doing and go home, but then I could write about what I was learning, because I was really learning. I had to ask what the journals in the field were when I started. I mean, I didn't know these things. And so then we just start doing these things, and things happen, and I think Writing Center people have this great ability to leap into the unknown. You don't know where you're going. You just go, and sometimes you land like who is it, Roadrunner, you just float down. And sometimes you can leap across and find some space out there. But you're talking about OWL. We started with these handouts because we didn't know what we were doing. Then when email came along, they said, the building had to close, and we weren't allowed to be there on weekends, but kids wrote their papers on weekends. So I said, let's get the handouts online, and they could figure out what MLA and all the other things are. People found those. And then the web came, so we put them on the web. And then I went to a meeting, and I said, great, let's all of us put our handouts online, because everyone's handouts were in everybody else's files. We used to have resource tables, or whatever we called them. And everybody would come and throw their handouts on the table, and we would all take the others and put them in. So a lot of the things on that OWL I probably picked up elsewhere from other people. And they said, let's all put it on, and we'll get this great recognition that writing centers are going to be the source of all knowledge, and everyone in the world's going to look at writing centers, and we'll put them all together. And everyone said, I don't know, she did it, let's just link to her. So things happen organically, sort of. They just happen and they evolve. And how many of you started out to be what you are now? How many of you knew where you were going with what you're doing? I think we have an incredible freedom to do what we love, because we could just do it. I mean, no one was paying attention to me in the department. I was somewhere below the night janitor, I was just hogging some space down there among the classrooms. So we do things not knowing where we're heading sometimes, and I think we have a beautiful situation. I mean, we're not the most prized people on campus. We don't have the prestige that other people have, but we forget that we're doing what we love, and you just get to sit and talk to students. And yeah, we have the crud work of the budgets and the grants and the administration and the reports. But that's just part of what we do. And then we get to share it with each other. I mean, I just love listening to your stories. You're listening, we're all listening to each other. I had this great fun listening to the two of them and the things they do. So we do an awful lot of sharing, and I guess we're all into sharing stuff. And I guess that's how we wind up where we are. And I'm not sure that answers your question.
Yeah, it answers.
Yeah. By the way, you want to remind everybody of your article? Just happen to remember?
I can't remember the title.
I can't either.
That's honest, I can't remember the title, but it was probably, it was over a decade ago. But.
Yeah, we've been publishing for volume 37. Yeah. And that grew organically. That was just a bunch of people at a 4C session trying to stay together, because there was no organization, there was no email, and we didn't have the budget to telephone each other. And that just kept, I mean, initially it was just trying to reach each other, and it just kept going. People began sharing things, and got into articles, and then did peer review, and technology came, and that's the way it happened. So think about your own histories and the things you've done. Did you know where you were going when you started? Did you? No. I sort of worry in reverse. I worry an awful lot about a kid who staggers into the writing lab, a freshman, and says, I'm going to be an electrical engineer. Does a 17 or 18-year-old really know where he's going? I think that's more scary than just saying, let's the foot out and take a jump and see what happens.
I'm going to say thank you, Vicki, for coming and doing this.
Thank you for inviting me. Nita's responsible for all this.
I called her up and I said, are you going to be in Chicago anytime soon? Because I know she's got family here. And fortunately, there was a family event this weekend. So.
And President Obama's coming tomorrow. So you get the real stars tomorrow. But I hear he's going to a school. He's not talking publicly.
I don't know.
Does anyone know what he's doing?
He's going to a high school, but he'll be covered by the press.
Oh, but is it a public speech?
I mean, I'm sure it'll be videotaped by someone.
Oh, he's supposed to be here selling his program tomorrow. I'm sorry, but that means traffic is going to be hell wherever he is.
Right? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nita.
For feeding everybody tonight. We appreciate, as always, everybody pulling together what they can, and doing whatever it takes for us to continue to have these fall and spring gatherings that are really important to this place, or this thing we call the Chicagoland Writing Center Association. So thank you for that.
And before people leave, I'm wearing another hat now, MWCA.
Okay.
The Midwest Writing Centers Association is hosting the every other year conference in Skokie in October.
Well, Chicagoland Writing Center Association is hosting
Midwest
Writing Center Association's conference.
That's right. So there won't be any CWCA gathering in the fall because we're hoping you'll all come to the MWCA conference. The two speakers, one you probably know, Ben Rafath. You know that
Anybody
name?
have read you guys have read the ESL work that Ben has done?
Yeah.
He's got a couple of books out about ESL tutoring. He and Shanti Bruce put one together that's pretty important.
And the other speaker is not known in writing center circles. She's not a writing center person. She works in conflict transformation in Evanston, especially multicultural kinds of conflict transformation. She doesn't call it resolution, she calls it transformation because she says you don't get rid of that. You use the energy and you turn it into something positive rather than dispersing it. And so she will be our other speaker, and we are hoping to have a really interesting conversation going on.
The call for proposals is out.
Yes, it is.
It's on CWCA.org.
Yeah, something like
well,
that.
DePaul, whatever.
Yeah.
Getting into details.
If you Google it, you'll find it. It's also on the MWCA website.
It is on the MWCA, but if you type in MWCA.org, I don't know, it's something different, so it's MWCA.
But we just only take 3 crowds